Okay, let's dive into a worldview that has captivated thinkers for centuries. Pantheism. You know, the idea that all is one. The source material for this explainer presents a really systematic critique of this worldview, and we're going to walk through its core arguments to understand the case it makes with clarity and force.
So the source material kicks things off by acknowledging the deep appeal of this idea. And it's not hard to see why, right? This promise of cosmic unity, of seeing the divine in a rustling leaf or the night sky, it offers this powerful sense of meaning and connection.
So what are we really talking about here? Well, at its core, pantheism identifies God with the universe itself. There's no separation. The creator and the creation are one and the same thing. This is the absolute foundation that everything else in this worldview is built on.
Now, to really get the critique that's being presented in our source, we have to start with this single most important distinction. You can think of this as the big philosophical fork in the road where these two worldviews just go in completely different directions.
This slide really boils the whole debate down to one core conflict. Is God identical with the universe? Kind of like an impersonal force that is everything. Or, as the Christian worldview presented in the source suggests, is God a separate, personal creator who is transcendent, meaning he exists above and outside of his creation. That single difference changes everything.
So this fundamental difference leads to some really profound challenges for the pantheistic worldview. And our source material systematically breaks them down. The critique argues that when you test this core idea against reality, logic, and just human experience, it starts to unravel.
Let's get into the first major issue the critique raises, and it is a big one: the reality of evil and suffering. How does a worldview where all is God even begin to account for the genuine pain and moral corruption we all see in the world?
The source argues that pantheism tries to solve the problem of evil by, well, basically by redefining it so it doesn't exist anymore. It's either an illusion because we can't see the bigger picture, or it's just a necessary shadow you need to appreciate the light. In stark contrast, the Christian view says that evil is terrifyingly real. It's a moral and spiritual rebellion against a good God.
And this, right here, illustrates the logical dead end, according to the critique. I mean, think about it. If all is God, that all has to include cancer, genocide, cruelty, deceit. The argument is that this doesn't just fail to solve the problem of evil, it actually makes God the author of it, which creates this profound moral contradiction.
Okay, next up, the critique digs into the internal logic of pantheism. It argues that to even accept its core ideas, you have to abandon the fundamental rules of reason, the very rules we use to make sense of reality.
The source points to a few fallacies, but the most critical one is the violation of what's called the law of non-contradiction. Basically, it just states that something can't be both true and false at the same time. The claim that good and evil are ultimately the same thing completely violates this. The critique also argues that just because things are interconnected doesn't mean they're divine. That's a huge logical leap, a non sequitur.
So here's the crucial point. If a worldview requires you to accept that opposites are the same, and that contradictions are just normal, how can it make any reliable claims about what is actually true? According to the source, it all just collapses into a system where truth is entirely subjective, and objective reality becomes meaningless.
Finally, let's see how all this builds to our understanding of ourselves. After tackling evil and logic, the critique turns to the nature of humanity. What does pantheism really say about who and what we are?
And here we see another really stark contrast. Pantheism says we are divine. The solution to our problems is to look inward and just realize the godhood we already have. But the Christian view presented in the source is fundamentally different. We are created in God's image, which means we reflect His nature, but we are not God. We're finite, we're fallen, and we need redemption that has to come from outside of ourselves. This creates two fundamentally different paths for all of us. One is a path of self-realization and, when you get right down to it, self-deification. The other is a path of relationship, repentance, and reliance on a transcendent creator for grace. The source is very clear. These two paths lead to entirely different destinations. So why does any of this philosophical stuff matter in the real world? This isn't just some academic exercise. The source argues the stakes are incredibly high, and they affect how we live, what we value, and where we place our ultimate hope.
The critique concludes that our core beliefs about God, reality, and ourselves, they're the engine of our lives. They determine our values, our entire basis for morality, and how we respond to suffering. Choosing a worldview isn't like choosing a new hobby. The source argues it's the most consequential choice any of us can make.
And that leaves us with a final, really provocative thought from this critique. The source challenges us to consider that the ultimate value of any worldview rests on the truth and the clarity it provides. By blurring these fundamental distinctions, it asks, does pantheism clarify reality, or does it just obscure it?